remains uncertain. But beyond the arithmetic lies a broader institutional question. How will Nepal's political system adapt to this changing shift in the central role in governance? And to explore that, I'm joined in by constitutional scholar Dr. Bipin Adhikari, who was closely involved in Nepal's constitution writing process. Dr. Adhikari, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Namaste.
It's a pleasure to have you here in our studios in this very, very crucial moments.
Thanks.
So let us begin at the core area of your expertise, Dr. Adhikari. Was the scenario of what we are witnessing at this moment so dramatic as many are perceiving, right? Was this scenario even anticipated or expected by our constitution?
I think it's very much normal in politics. Once you have elections, most of the time you are very clear which one is going to be the first party or second party. But then in the present case, it was somewhat a little surprise also. But then everybody expected RSP to perform better than what they did last time. Beyond that, this time, they have done very well. I mean, they are not simply going to be a largest party, but hopefully a majority party also with a very strong presence in the House of Representatives. So this will be the first time after the promulgation of the new constitution of Nepal in 10 years. Let's say we will have the first majority-led government, and that's something very good for the country. But again, the scenario will be clear only after all the results are declared. So the counting is going on, and it is very clear that RASP is leading, and then the competing parties who are on the pipeline, they are not doing better, and the gap between them is so vast. So that means that the new party will form a government which is very confident, which has very strong presence in the parliament, and also which can make a lot of changes they have been talking about.
That's something the Nepali people have been looking forward to for a long, long time now. But still, given the electoral system that Nepal exercises, it's too early for us to make any sort of predictions, but then assumptions that we cannot stop, right? And again, there's been so much drama in the numbers that are surfacing. But still, let me get back to the same question again. When Nepal's current constitutional framework was designed, Dr. Adhikari, under the Constitution of Nepal 2015, and which, one of the architects, you were in the team.
I don't say I'm an architect, but then I was, one of the experts providing external support to the constitution building process.
Right. So as one of the experts, was the possibility of a completely new political party or political force emerging so quickly in Parliament something that the Constitution anticipated?
That's now the fait accompli. I don't say that gives a negative connotation. That's not my intention. The RASP is on board, obviously, as a leading party. And the way they have been performing, it shows that they will lead the future, and with a very strong presence in the House, as I said already. So this time the difference is the opposition parties will be meager. There will be very limited number of parties in the parliament, and most of the parties are, at present, they are fighting their existence in the polling center. You can see that there are more than 65 parties contesting elections, and they have not been able to show up the, with the ballot papers, so far. And only a couple of parties are there. And even the dominant parties in the country so far, like Nepali Congress, UML, And the other parties who started as regional parties are also facing the existential crisis, because getting down to you can see that Nepali Congress will now its strength in the house that was dissolved was almost 88 or 89 out of 275. Now it's not going to be the same. They will decline further, and it's possible that they will end up with let's say let's say 24-25 seats said to be declared, but then they are not performing. So the opposition will be a weak opposition with a very strong heavyweight ruling party, and that means the parliamentary system, especially its internal check and balance, will suffer with that changed context, and that's very much going to happen very soon.
And it's just 10 years or a little more that the Constitution was promulgated, right? So
yes,
I mean, like, was this anticipated, or did the Constitution anticipated a little gradual change in these sort of
situations? I think the formation of government, as far as the Constitution is concerned, it only has the provisions for how, in a given scenario, the government will be formed. And this type of eventuality is always there in the Constitution, so it's not unpredictable. So what is now the change in the scenario is that a single party is coming up as a dominant party in the parliament. And many of us here, they used to remark that it's not possible to form a majority government in Nepal anymore because of the proportional electoral system. And now it has proved wrong, that even within the proportional system, a strong majority party could lead the government. So if there are alternatives, people are ready to vote for. So the constitutional provisions are there. I don't think there is any stress on these provisions.
Nepal's parliamentary system combines both the direct elections and the PR representation as well. So we still have to wait a little more to see a clearer picture of how the equations emerge, right? From a constitutional design perspective, Dr. Adhikari, what role does this proportional representation meant to play in moments like this? Like, is the system designed to moderate sudden electoral swings like the ones that we're experiencing?
I think it was like it was not a swing. In fact, the dominant political forces in the country had a problem to read, what is written on the wall. They have been failing because there was, a strong hue and cry that the government has not been able to ensure good governance. The rising corruption had been an issue always, and the selective enforcement of rule of law had been clearly an issue for many years. So that was something that everybody talked about, but then none of the political parties in the country were able to pick up these little threads in the electoral process. This time RSP did it, and so RSP came forward as an alternative, and obviously it is being trusted by the people. The proportional representation, in fact, this has been introduced into the constitutional system of Nepal to make sure that there is a proper level of inclusion in the political process, and also that the regions as well as the ethnic groups in the country are properly represented. So that came in addition to first past the post system, which is ideology based. And many people thought that the political parties in Nepal, they will be able to keep up with the ideological thread along with representation ensured through proportional system. And in fact, they have been able to do it. It's only that this time, the change is, it has reached through a crisis level. Now that people voted without trusting anybody. And you can see that, as I said, the competitors are not performing very well. If you see how the RSP is leading in almost all constituencies, except there are rare exceptions. Otherwise, it's very something that we didn't see before, that even now votes are being counted in more than 120 constituencies. The 120 constituencies, and in all of these constituencies RSP is leading, and except for the gaps between the winner and those following up is very big. And it's because even the voters of the first the post system, they have been very, very objective this time. They didn't trust their the old allies anymore.
So you would rather dub it as an issue of delivery,
yes,
rather than a failure of a system?
No, the system has not failed. I think the system is intact, and nobody has really complained about the system. There are some marginal voices about how to make it more representative, and obviously that could always be done if there is a national consensus. But then the political parties, they had a problem. So despite the clear constitutional position about inclusion, proportional inclusion, and many voices of change, the provisions of change, these were not implemented so well. And the problem started with the political parties as public institutions, and now there is a change. So the driver will be replaced this time.
Right. So if the current trend holds, just let's shift our focus to the emerging figures from the Election Commission at the moment. If the current trend holds, Dr. Adhikari, Nepal could see a parliament where traditional parties are significantly weakened, right? And as you said, certainly we are looking, like the figures show a pretty much weakened opposition, right? So a parliamentary democracy largely relies not only on a government but also on a very, very credible opposition. So in an assumption, should the traditional forces collapse in this election, who provides the opposition?
The opposition will still be there. It's only that it will not be as strong as before. In fact, during the last two general elections, we had very clear opposition parties within the parliament, but then they were very ambitious. In fact, the coalitions that were manufactured, during the last 20 years, I think they were not strictly on the basis of democratic principles. So, despite the fact that some political parties clearly had the popular mandate in their favor, some weaker parties, the opposition groups who should have been in the opposition, they were leading the government because they tried to, some way manage the mathematics in the and some way come out with the majority, but leaving the fact that elections are held in order to see who has popular mandate, and forces with popular mandate were forced to be in the opposition. For example, you see Nepali Congress was the largest party in the bygone parliament, but then it was not leading the show simply because of certain political interest. And it was like in the coalition, it was a marginal partner, and the government was led by UML. And that happened because the principle of democracy were not, very much into play in this dynamics of, relationship. Now that there will be a change, there will still be certain political parties, for example, and there is a possibility that they will merge with each other, many of them, in order to ensure their visibility as an opposition group, or even they will have some working coalition between themselves. So that way also they can ensure that they are able to serve as opposition, a loyal opposition to the system.
Would that pave way to a danger that too weak in opposition could weaken democratic accountability?
I think opposition is very much needed, and it has to be a strong opposition. But in modern world, it's not the opposition in parliament which matters. We have the free and independent media, which I think, if you compare with the rest of the South Asian countries, I think we are still very much independent, and that serves to the advantage of our democracy. And apart from that, the civil society of Nepal is also very much, I think it is very strong, and so it is also there. And even RSP, it is going to have the necessary numbers to make it stronger, but it cannot be very strong because it is yet to develop as a political party, because it lacks institutions throughout the country. I mean, the first thing. Secondly, it has to develop internal disciplines. I mean, this is the code of conduct and the certain, standard norms and values that will be used to discipline the cadres as well as the leaders. And they project the party as a single unified voice, and that takes a lot of time. After the government is formed, it will have to be pursued very carefully and for a long time. Similarly, we can see that because the party is very new, the candidates, they come from different background. Most of the candidates of RSP, they are not from social background. They have not been very much in the political, let's say at the grassroots level. They have very meager, existence. So whatever, even though they are in the parliament, I mean, their relationship with the people who voted for them is still weak. They have to build on that. And these, I said, social, groups, professional groups, civil society, universities, and Nepal is very much politically divided society. It's divided because it's not developing very fast. When the development process is very fast, people become futuristic. When this is not the case, people concentrate on distributive issues more, on creating, rather than how to create more wealth, and that could be distributed. So these are challenges for the new party, and they have no idea at all. What I see is they have a very small but very meaningful political manifesto that they released before contesting elections. It's a very smart document. I can see that they have been able to understand the country and also project what they need to do if they are elected. So this is a time to work on that. But building on that will take, many years. So, and some of the challenges are very difficult challenges. So they have committed, for example, that they will implement the recommendation of Janji Commission, which is yet to submit its report to the government. And that report will deal with the Janji movement, especially the movement that kicked off the whole process in the last September. You can see that there are issues of impunities, liabilities, violation of criminal law, violence, all these things there. Now they are committed to it. There is a social contract. Similarly, they have been saying that they will be, if they are elected, they will be opening up all corruption files, since 1990. So that's a very, very loud claim. You have to see whether legally it is possible, because criminal laws have the concept of limitations, and the institution of any case has to go through certain procedural requirements. So these are challenges that they have to manage in due course.
Exactly, Dr. Adhikari, because what the Nepali people are sending into the parliament is a lot of hope, dreams, promises, frustration and aspirations. Yes. But the real test begins after the euphoria settles down, right? So after all the arithmetic settles down. So you lead me to the challenge part. So let us now walk through a few of the major challenges that we foresee in the very, very immediate future. Now, as young as the new political force is apparently, even Nepal's constitution is equally, young to Nepal, right?
A new document.
Nepal's constitutional system again is federal in nature now, a very new federal democratic with significant powers distributed to the provinces as well. So even if the federal parliament changes dramatically with the new forces ushering in, provincial governments may remain dominated or will remain dominated by the established parties. How much of a friction do you foresee in the very immediate future?
I think there are many such issues, and the first thing is to, the new government will have to make sure that it knows what it is going to do in the next 5 years, make the detailed plan, and start with the first step. So popular, decision making does not help at all. So what we saw in the past, they take political decision very fast, and later they realize that they decided something very wrong. And now when you think about a constitutional amendment, for example, it's a major issue. The RSP has not taken any position on it, but then this is something that it will be, pressurized, into, thinking, because there are issues, that needs to be handled. And now how it's going to do it? This is one thing. There are foreign policy issues, and that's something that many critics are worried about, because most of these people are very young, and many of them, do not have very firm background in Nepali society, Nepali history, Nepali culture, Nepal's, fight for its existence over the, last 200 years. This has been a significant issue, international relations, and coming back to the internal issues. There are, this is a society with many ethnic groups, the many regions, and there are different aspirations. Now, these issues are, it's not enough that you are correct. You have to be reasonable also, and then you should be able to demonstrate it to the people, even to the people who disagree with you, and that's also there. So it has to be done, step by step, and without losing the current, and that's always a challenge.
Mm-hmm. We've been discussing the constitutional and institutional implications of these election trends. But of course, there are Nepalis who are watching us live at the moment, Dr. Adhikari, and who are also watching these developments very, very closely. And many are asking some practical questions about what happens next. So let's bring in a few questions that our viewers have sent in on our live streamings and our broadcast. I would want to pick a question first from Manuja Upriti, and she asks, do you think the new party that is likely to form the upcoming government will be able to address the demands of the Gen Z?
Yeah, of course, it is in a position to fulfill the demands of the youths of the country. So, and in fact, RSP has come forward because of the strong support of youths, and so they have required majority, and the constitution does not prohibit for any changes. They can go for any changes, and the challenge is to sit with the youths and find out what exactly they want and how to pursue it, because there is no quick fix to their problems. Youths are related with different problems in our society, and it's a matter of prioritization and also developing strategies and then pulling on resources. And this is possible, especially for the people who are educated, who have very good background, who are committed to this country. The government should be able to offer what it can do to them, to the entrepreneurs, to the fresh graduates, to those who want to stay in the country and contribute to its development as well as build their career. So this is possible, and now that they can start with the ministry, with a clear terms of reference for the youths, and we don't have some separate committed ministerial portfolio for the youths and their issues.
Mm-hmm. The next question I get to pick is from Haris Suwal, and Haris Suwal chose to send us a question which reads, is it just a political wave for change or real awakening of the voters?
I think this is a very calculated question, I can see. I would say this is a mix of both these situations, expectations, and obviously people who voted, they voted for good, and then there was a big wave. You see, the parties, the political parties who ruled the country so far, let's say for the last 35 years or so, they were very strong parties. Now at once they all are on the margins. That means that there was something seriously wrong on their part. Now those who are saying that they have the solution to the problems of this society, they should be able to deliver, and nothing will help if the delivery, that means good governance aspect of the new government is weak. So I would say that we have to offer solutions on both these parts.
Mm-hmm. Some really interesting questions coming in, Dr. Adhikari. We have one from Janardhan Baral, who asks, the voters' turnout suggested otherwise of the general excitement. How do you see the significant drop in the voters' turnout at polling stations?
I think there are, I think in Nepal, this was not a right timing for the general elections. We need to understand, but it was a constitutional compulsion. We cannot, hold up election for an indefinite period. Once the House is dissolved, within 6 months, the replacement must be there. So not a good season for the election. And in the Himalayan region, obviously, even now there is snowfall. So people who had to travel to the polling stations, they had to suffer. That must have, impacted. And also there are, it's true that many new faces turned up this time, but many old faces, they declined. They thought that what the use of voting again and again? It does not, bring any change to our situation. So that mentality must also have some way affected the decision making. And also that 60% is not bad. If we go by international average, that's still very important, I think. We talk about legitimacy of the election only when the system has not offered opportunities to the people to go to the polling stations. There are structural disadvantages created, but we don't have that scenario anymore. So the 60% turnout is not bad. I would say if we are able to maintain it, I think we still can have a legitimate government politically. Right. Constitutionally, it is already legitimate.
Mm-hmm. There's one more question coming in. I'm not sure if this is quite relevant to the context or the topic that we are discussing, but still I would want to take this question. There's no name, it's an anonymous question. It says, why cannot we implement out-of-constituency voting and abroad voting? I'm sure there were so many people who wanted to vote but were refrained from their voting rights owing to all these infrastructure and policy hurdles. So the question is why, and is there a special protocol for voting from outside the country?
This is possible, but then it's a management issue. We need to develop our capacity to do it, number one. The second thing is when we have, polling stations, organized outside the country, the political power of the government will get limited, because it's not just about casting the vote, it's about exercising political freedoms. And then no foreign country will allow our people to exercise political freedoms in their country in order to effect, our, to take part in our, voting system, the casting vote here. So, and the technology aspect is very important, and you can see that we have not been able to do some little technological changes even in Nepal. And so when doing it internationally, we need a lot of strong the support from the technical team, which the election commission is not capable of at present. But then my point of view was we could have started piloting it from one or two countries, and then based on our experience this time, we could have gradually further develop our strategy, but that didn't happen at all. So initially the Home Minister was very positive about it. And my comment was, we have a very young, minister, and very hopeful, and good luck. But then there are challenges, and these things have not been done, not because the political representatives didn't want it, simply because they were not able to do it, and not just for the sake of, because of the resources, but also because of capacity. And basically technical capacity.
Right, because with a significant population like living outside the geography of Nepal, and even like so many people, living at various parts of inside Nepal's boundaries.
And also, digital voting is not something that that you can do so easily if the voters are not quite educated about certain digital.
So we need to prepare.
Yeah, you have to educate them. The voters training program have to be initiated. The confidence has to be developed among people living outside, and there are the aging people also who have a problem to live up with technology, and also very young professionals. And obviously, once you allow them, they will have their own demands about timing, about certain structures, and things go on, because you can once you start, you have to be gradually you have to unfold yourself,
right,
and provide opportunities as far as possible. So that was
it is
a challenge,
inevitable.
I think.
It will come, but a lot of preparations needs to be done.
If we
for
start
that, right?
now, probably in the next 5 years, we might be able to start it in certain jurisdictions.
Dr. Adhikari, let's come back to the other part of the conversation now. Let me begin with one of the questions sent in by our viewers. Let me build on a little more on what the viewer said, because when voters deliver a result that is this dramatic, right? Analysts often call it a mandate. Everybody calls it a mandate, but mandates are usually, or it can be, very ambiguous as well. What has been your observation? Did voters vote for the agenda of Rashtriya Swatantra Party, or did they vote against the traditional political establishment?
I think basically they wanted to get rid of the traditional political parties. That's very true. I thought that Nepali Congress will still perform because there was a change of leadership, and the new leader was certainly a cut above others, and somebody who really one of the smartest politicians in the country. But then people were not able to recognize, because they wanted to get rid with political parties. It's because of the habits, the culture, the political culture of the ruling elite that developed a very sinister face during the last 10 years, or even for many decades, I must say. So but then there are voters who thought of who went through the party manifesto also, who really thought that there are educated people with RSP. These people are not anyway lesser in education or performance in their field than others in the political mainstream in Nepal, and also that especially recently Balendra Shah as a mayor, he performed very well. So the political parties especially, they didn't like him so well, but then people were able to see that the Kathmandu, metropolitan city they lived in was not the same after 3 years of his tenure as the mayor. So the changes are something that have been noted, and the political side is also very prominent. You can see the mayor comes from Madhesi background, has a Madhesi background, but has a very strong national perspective. That's something many Madhesi leaders lacked in this country. They always talked about their narrow framework, rather than talking about the nation. And this gentleman was very different. So he never talked about his ethnicity, talked about the country, the change, the development, the positive, scenario that we needed, and he delivered. So that was something that was a very good example that RSP was able to, share with the voters in its, public programs throughout the country, and that helped the party to really, generate interest in its perspectives.
Mm-hmm. So you really mean to say it gathered an appeal for the voters, especially the voters, are very, what you called action-hungry voters, right?
Absolutely.
That is quite an appeal for the voters, which instigated such a momentum.
Rabi Lamichhane himself, is is an aggressive speaker, who can perform very well in terms of public speech, and that's something. And also that he has his image as a TV journalist, and many people knew him as a journalist who always was on the right side of the history. So that has had certain advantage. And also the new faces, these people were not controversial, the candidates that were given, but rather you can say they were least known but not controversial, and mostly educated. And so in an environment where you don't have good options, they came with options. So the traditional parties have to look back and see where they committed mistake in their election campaigns, and the mistakes are very clear.
Mm-hmm. And even for the new force, Dr. Adhikari, because around the world we've seen movements rise very, very quickly, especially during periods of public frustration, right? But governing requires some really strong administrative capacity, policy frameworks, and institutional coordination, which you already stated the new party or the new force is still gathering and building on. So from your perspective, what would be the most immediate institutional challenge for any new government that emerges from this election?
I think, the party will obviously it will be overwhelmed by expectations from the voters, and also we have a concept of quickly talking about 100 days and accomplishment within this period. It's rubbish. I don't believe in it. But then this is how Nepali voters think. This issue is also there. But then once the government is formed, the government will have to do what they have promised, very small things, to bring in changes which are very significant in the country. You have to first of all stop politicization of bureaucracy, stop it outright. And once the bureaucracy comes back to normal, it has enormous talent, a lot of capacity, the historical knowledge, and there are institutions and practices that are enough to sustain our governance system. So the second thing is political appointments. Stop appointing people who are politically biased. Go for professionals and people with real capacity, and the people with optimum capacity in the positions that they deserve most. And once the three things are done together, I think the whole scenario will change. This is a country with abundance of resources. We don't suffer from lack of resources. The money is not an issue. The reputation of the country is still very good, and we have a very good network of relationship internationally. Now that the government has to balance international relations, make sure that our processes are autonomous and with young people and leaders like RSP, the challenge is to make sure that the new establishment is believed by both our neighbors as well as the international community, and that's very significant because they very often tilt towards one side and lose the goodwill of the other, and this is not how a country can go forward. So similarly, the budget, our national budget is always underspent, less utilized. The development programs have not been successful. So the management capacity has been a disaster because the people who have been recruited are incompetent people. Once these competent peoples are on board, things will have a very positive scenario. And Nepalese have been looking forward to see that democracy is at work. And that is something that the new government will have to assure. And these little things mean a lot to the common people. And they know that the government is not going to distribute cash to them. So nobody is expecting it. They want that the service delivery is not obstructed. So whatever is there in law is hopefully in reality as well. So this is something that comes as a challenge, and capacity, obviously as we go along we can develop, but then norms and practices we can improve immediately, and this is the challenge for the new leadership.
And in the midst of all this, how do you perceive the role of bureaucracy and the bureaucratic cooperation?
Bureaucracy, I think we have, even now, I think, well, I come from the independent, sector, not from the public sector as such. But then this is very clear that even now, today, the government is the biggest employer in the country. It is the smartest of all the employers. It goes through Public Service Commission. The talented people are here. It was only that the working environment was bad because it was politically tainted. Now that once there is a professional government which knows what is the limit to its power, certainly the bureaucracy will be able to help the new government by all means. And it's now, once you don't divide the bureaucracy politically, obviously you can take the help of everybody there. And we have very eminent people there, very trained, people with expertise. And I said even now we have the best lawyers in the bureaucracy, best accountants are there in the bureaucracy. I can say that the best policymakers are there. So the government's resources have been underutilized. And now that once there is a government which does not have to feed its cadre, obviously it can build on its strength. And I think if there is they take the due course, these things will eventually come, the alignment will gradually be developed.
Mm-hmm. And now let me come to one of the most fundamental questions, Dr. Adhikari. Nepal's constitution is still relatively very, very young. And if a relatively new party, suddenly dominates the House of Representatives, does that suggest the system is working? Because voters can dramatically change leadership like what we are seeing right now? Or does it suggest the system hasn't been delivering, prompting voters to seek an entirely new political force, right? So does this election reopen the debate about constitutional reform?
I think, well, there are always some people talking about constitutional amendment. But amendment is not a game of chance. You have to plan it. You have to think about it. with certain, homework, and that has to be done by the government first. The government has to study where does it want changes. And once it is clear about its proposal, it can then, go to public platforms. Obviously, it can come out with a green paper and then start discussing it at popular level. So that has not happened in Nepal. And if you believe me, you see, I saw at present we don't have any anti-constitutional voice in Nepal. If people are talking about it against the constitution, they are in their drawing rooms, not in the public forums. You can see even Biplav, the only left out politician who didn't endorse this constitution, was also seen voting this time. Okay, so you can see we don't have anti-constitutional voice. Many Madhesis, many Janjatis, many deprived people, they want to see that this constitution is implemented according to its own standards. So whatever is being offered is not being actualized, is not being operationalized. We want to see these provisions, must be implemented so that the people, the affected interest, really could feel that, okay, there is a change in the system now. And now our plight is also changing. Now that has not happened. So the first challenge is to implement the constitution. And of course, there are people who think that our federalism, the federalization process has not worked. I mean, we can look into it. That's an important, aspect of our, constitutional process. Similarly, there are many economic, social, and cultural rights. They need to be enforced, very strongly, and that has not been done. We can see what is the problem with the relevant laws. Similarly, we can also see that there are many constitutional commissions. They need to be boosted up so that they are relevant in terms of our governance system, and that needs to be done. There are so many issues, but I don't think there are issues that places us in the margin of life and death. It's untrue. It's simply not the case.
Right. This question or concern has come to the fore, especially owing to a few statements or reservations embraced by the members of the newly constituted political force, the emerging political force, right? So the clarity, as you said, is yet to come for the
position. But let me tell you that I've gone through the party manifesto of RSP. I mean, they don't talk about constitutional amendment. So very smartly, they didn't want to, enter into controversies at the polling center. So that was very smart way. And now that they are, once they start leading the government, they can obviously, as constitute a task force on constitutional amendment. And in fact, the present government has already signed, an understanding with the Genji representatives about, organizing the constituting task force in order to reform the constitution. So it's a commitment of the government already. So the new government can work on it, but it's a slow process. You don't have to go for high jump. No need. This is a process that has to go stepwise, and don't create bumps before you start. Right. So that is possible.
Right. Should a scenario or a situation like this arise, Dr. Adhikari, is Nepal ready for a constitutional amendment? Or let me rephrase it, or would reopening that debate risk destabilizing the political system again?
I think now the government, the new government, will be a strong government. at least in terms of ballot papers. It had that, capacity to bring, to introduce its, concept about changes in the constitution. So it can talk about it because it has the control system at work now. It doesn't, rely on coalition anymore. So if it feels it has to go ahead, it can start with a moderate planning. But then I think it can, the challenge is to implement the constitution so that we really know what exactly are its problem. I mean, we are hypothesizing, talking about something we don't know fully. I'm a constitutional expert, but I feel that even today there are many provisions in the Constitution that have not been given enough opportunity towards implementation. It's because the government of the day thought that it's not necessary. For example, the Constitution has a provision for creation of autonomous regions. I mean, there are many people who are thinking in terms of, protecting their identity through the political structures. The Constitution had that vision in the document, but then that has not been done. No law has been passed towards that, particular objective, and so many people feel that okay, we are a minority, or we are a small ethnic group or deprived ethnic group, and we are not able to have our own, regional system, even though the Constitution has offered it. So that's something we should not lie about our political system. If it is there in the Constitution, it has to be on the ground as well. And that is something that has to be explored now, that there is a constitution, the new government, does not have any, controversies with it. Of course, with leadership there are certain issues, even with RSP, but then these are always there in a lively, political system. But once the government is instituted, it can go through all these, constitutional provisions and make sure that they are implemented to know what are the reforms actually needed so that we can do the job better. So the Constitution has a framework. So there we talk about constitutional change so much. This is not necessary. This Constitution can be used for present purpose even without amendment if there are right set of people able to implement it. So this is what we have to think.
Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. Thank you so much for coming over and sharing your very insightful thoughts.
My pleasure.
Right. The election results suggest that Nepal may be entering a new phase in its democratic journey. A new political force appears to have captured the aspirations of voters who have grown impatient with instability and political stagnation. But elections are only the opening chapter, and Nepal's political system is shaped by institutions, federal structures, and the constitutional framework established under the Constitution of Nepal 2015. Those institutions move more slowly than electoral waves. So the real question now is whether this moment of political change can translate into something more durable, stable, governance and institutional reform and renewed public trust. And that was a discourse that we had with our constitutional expert. And that's it from this special dialogue program. We'll continue to bring in you more aspects of the Nepal elections 2026 in our programs that will follow in the following days. Until then, from the entire team, goodbye.